So this tutorial will be talking you through various different techniques and methods on how I go about changing from one texture to another. I've picked this Lima Eye because this section here changes quite often. So we have the eye obviously as a sort of a glassy wet surface, and then it has the skin visible through the hair around the eye itself. It then moves down to the nose, which is a wet surface, but it's got a texture to it which is different to the eyeball. And then in the background here there is the lighter fur, which is in this picture actually out of focus, so that is a slightly different technique as well. We've got short fur on the nose, and there are also whiskers, so there's lots of different textures on this one little section. So I'm just going to talk through the basic techniques. I'm not going to do this all in real detail as such. It's going to be mostly the base layers and just how I go about picking things for each section. So I'm going to start off with the eyeball because quite often that's where we like to start with drawing wildlife. For this I'm going to start off with a dark sepia, nice and sharp, because it helps to draw a nice crisp outline. I'm just going to sharpen that one, and then I've got a point like this. So I'm going to just draw around the edge of the eye so that I have a nice clear outline for this area. I'm using a really light pressure just to sketch in that first little bit. I don't want to go too heavy just in case I draw a line in the wrong place. And then I'll just go all the way around that eyeball. Because it's at an angle, it's not round at this angle. I mean, you've got the curve here, but the rest of it kind of slants in. So make sure you follow the lines on your outline. If you've traced it or transferred it or drawn it by eye, just make sure you follow that curve in the right way. I'm going to just draw around the outside of these little highlights around the eyelid as well, just so that they are blocked in, as it just helps me to figure out where I am on the eyeball or the eyelid once I get outside of the eyeball itself. I'm just going to sketch it really lightly. You can see I'm not going in full hard lines, I'm just sketching it out. Once I know where I am, I then go in with a slightly harder pressure, but I will still break away if I need to, just so that I make sure I follow that line correctly. It doesn't have to be one solid line all the way around. So make sure you get the curves in the right place. Okay. Now this eye, you'll see from the reference, it's got quite a big reflection on it. So I'm going to draw in the pupil first, but just with a very light pressure again, sketching it out around the outside of that pupil. It's got a tiny little bit of the reflection visible on the pupil, so I'm just going to draw that in as well. And to get a nice blended in base, what I like to do is start off with a similar tone but just a lighter version. So I'm going to go with warm grey 1 and just fill in a base on that little eye pupil there. Fill that in. Use the circular scribbly kind of motion mentioned in quite a few of my tutorials, so that just works the pencil into the paper. So now it's got a base layer, I can then go back in with the dark sepia, and you'll just find that it is a lot smoother. The paper is a smooth paper. I've got Fabriano here, but it does require quite a lot of blending in. So if you've got a base layer already down, you'll find it blends a lot easier with the next layer. So I'll just fill that in. It will need another layer of a darker shade. You can go black or you know, whatever you've got. Sometimes I use dark indigo, but bit of brown. Right, so the rest of the iris, it changes between this top bit up here being quite cool. It's got pink tones in it as well, and then the rest of it is much warmer with yellow background. So I'm going to fill in the bit at the bottom here. Right, so I have it vaguely marked out where the reflection goes to. So on the warmer bit at the bottom here, I'm just going to fill it all in, not worry too much about where I'm going with it. Changed to the circular scribble like motion again, just filling it all in, make sure all of the tooth of that paper has got a smooth layer on top. And then just be careful around this section because it does change to the slightly cooler tone. But that is, I think this laying a base layer is good for any texture that you're going on to create. So this bit is kind of universal. It's not just for eyeballs. I've got another warmer tone here. This is a Caran d'Ache one, so it's a bit creamier. Just going to put in a few of the details in the iris. Just going with the direction of the lines, making sure I follow it round. This tutorial is going to be reasonably fast paced. I'm not going to be doing it to the highest level of detail because I want to cover a few different areas. So this bottom bit here is quite dark, so I'm going to lay a heavier, more solid layer on that one. And I'm going to go up to the top bit of the iris with a lighter shade of grey for the base. I'm just going to have to sharpen that so it's got a nice sharp edge for those weird shapes. It's not super sharp, but it'll do. Just going to fill in that top section. You'll look at the reference and it isn't really yellowy at all. It's got a few little pinky red bits in it, but it's mostly reflecting a white cloudy sky, so it's quite a cool tone. And then I'm just going to add in some more of the warmer tones just to break up the where the highlight hits the eye. I'm not going to be super accurate with how this shape works. If you want to spend a bit more time on it, that's fine. But I'm just going to plonk in the rough shape there. I'm going to use the circular kind of more oval shape, scribbly kind of motion to blend that in. Still really light pressure. Don't do anything hard at this point. It's only if you get to this darker section down here, you can see I've pressed slightly harder for this bit because you know that's in shadow. And then on that top section there is a little bit of a kind of warm pinky sort of colour in there. It's just where the blue or the white of the sky is on the orange eyeball, so it's kind of distorted the colour a little bit. If you struggle to to pick your colours, you can use apps, you can use software like Photoshop or any of the other free ones similar to Photoshop, and you just pick out the colour that you can draw it away from your image, so that you can just do a little spot to help you see it away from all the other colours. Most of the time I tend to just pick as I go along. I don't use colour pickers as such. I've just got to the point where I can look at the reference and kind of pick out some of the colours. And then once you get to know your pencils as well, you can just tally it up so you see the reference and then you know roughly which pencil you need to grab. So it's just a case of, repetition, learning your colours, learning your pencils, and it comes gradually. And see, the edge of a highlight on an eyeball like this is quite strong, so get that shape in there and put some more of these details in. A little bit more detail or shadow on that bottom bit of the eye, just gives it the shape. And then I'm just going to get a little bit of this to blend these together. I won't be giving you which colours and pencils I'm using on this one, because it's really not about the colour as such, it's more about the process. So I've done pretty much all of the base on that. You can see where the highlight is. I would then get a white or maybe a buff titanium, something like that, nice and sharp, and just go in against the edge of the highlight, especially on this bit up here with the black iris, pupil. Always get that muddled up. Just blend that in. Any lighter colours like this really help to blend, so when you're on your sort of second, third, fourth layer, you can add a light colour over the top and do this sort of circular scribbly motion, and it will really help to blend everything together. I'm just going to go over the pupil again, so that's nice and solid, and it's got a shadow around, and then some of these lines do come off of here. Like I say, I'm not going to do this super detailed or anything, which is actually really hard because I was so used to doing it detailed, so stopping early is a bit weird. Right, so when you're creating a glassy sort of surface on your drawing, it's all about making sure the contrast between the highlight and the rest of the surface is quite strong, so you have a clear divide. So we've got these shapes here, so you can go in with a pencil against the edge just to make sure that the highlight is very clear. You don't want to have like a wibbly line. Wibbly. I mean, I'm going in quite a lot darker on here than it actually is on the reference. But I can go back over it with, it's more of an orangey tone, but I can go back over it with that orange in a minute. The burnt sienna is really good as well, so I'll use that one just to go over this, blend all of that. And then if you find that your colours get a bit muddy, like mine have a little bit here, so I've been plonking colours over the top, if you then get a lighter, like so this one is Primrose, Caran d'Ache, Luminance, I'm just going to use that to go over the iris details and add in a little bit of the highlight to the iris as well. So sometimes when you are just making it up as you go along, you can get these sort of problems, but there are often ways of overcoming them. So like for example, I've just lightened up an area which was quite dark. The top bit up here I've made a bit dark because I used too much dark sepia, so I can use the burnt ochre, yeah, to make that a little bit more orangey again. And then I'll get a burnt sienna to just put in some more red tones as well. I hope you can see what I'm doing. I know my camera is it's not focusing on the drawing very well, so apologies for that. Right, so moving on from there, I mean it's not as detailed as I would do if I was drawing this properly. I'm just going to pop in some of the little eyelashes because that helps to give it a bit more depth and definition as well. But moving on to the eyelid, you can see through the hair to the skin on the eyelid on this lemur. So for that I would focus on the skin first and then add in the hair afterwards. So looking through, I can see that it's quite a bluish tone grey. So I'm going to use a cold grey. This is cold grey 2, and I'll just plonk a base layer on that. This is sort of a medium to firm pressure because it needs to be quite dark eventually, so I don't want to start too light. So medium pressure on that, just fill in that area. I think the most important thing when picking out colours for base layers is just to pick out if it's a warm tone or a cool tone. So if this area was more of a warmer grey, then that would have been a warm grey 2 rather than a cold grey 2. So yes, I mean, once you get the hang of it, it can seem quite simple, but it's just one of those things where a bit of trial and error really, just figuring out what works for you. I'm going to go on the underneath of this eyelid as well because it's just all the same tone. These lines here are the edge of this bit of his cheek. I'm going to add that all in. Although it's furry, I'm not really going against. I mean, I'm going towards the direction of the fur. I'm not doing individual fur strokes, but I am doing if I do it slowly, I'm doing this kind of motion, like an elongated oval shape, just to fill in that space, but kind of maintain the direction. So this bit up here going up to the nose changes direction slightly, so as I fill that in I will change how I'm applying the pencil. So concentrating, like looking back at your reference and just looking at the direction of fur is really important, even on the base layer, because it just means that you have a good starting point to build on. This bit above, again, is quite furry, but we can see a little bit of the skin below it. So I'm just going to fill this bit in, because then on the other side of this line is white fur. So I'm just going to fill this in up to the line. Again, focusing on the direction. There's a little section here which is the blend of the white going into the dark fur. So I would still cover this with a bit of the cold grey tone, but I'm just going to keep it a little bit lighter over there. I'm going to fill in this gap here, and then the edge of the eye has a bit of a dark corner there, so I'm just going to put a base so we can fill that in darker. And the little reflected bits on the eyelid here is still a cooler tone as well, so I'm just going to fill that in, but with a slightly lighter pressure, so there's a bit of an obvious divide there. So there's just this little bit here, if I just fill that in as well. So when you're changing to a different section, I think it's just important to pay attention to the tone, the direction of what you're drawing, what it needs to be. So if it's fur, if it's a nose, for example, it would just be lots of circles again. The eye obviously was quite just a universal blended layer. But then when we've got to the fur, it is slightly more important to have a bit more of a direction. So it's just paying attention to what section you are on, but then not overthinking it, because if you start overthinking things, then it can become a little bit tricky. So I've done most of the grey up there. I think I will actually just go all the way up, so I just looked at the rest of the reference. May as well fill in up here again, just with sort of a scribbly motion, just following the direction of fur. And it's cool all the way up, so I'll just fill that in. This lemur's fur is a bit tricky where it goes from white to dark, so we might use the slice tool at some point. Okay, so I've done the base layer. I would then look at where I see the darker bits, so the, creating the contrast and adding in the values, because that's where we start to see a bit of shape and give it a bit more of a 3D effect. So this eyelid comes over the top here, so there's a shadow above it. So I'm going to fill that in just with quite a light pressure, maybe slightly firmer to do the lines up against the edge. And then this bit up against the eye itself can be quite solid. I'm going to draw in the corner of the eye, so it's really dark. And then follow it round. So the eyelid itself has sort of an inner line there, just catches the inside of the eyelid, and then this bit on the outside is furry. So just keep looking back at your reference, because if you get into the habit of looking at your reference, looking at your drawing, and then seeing where the change in texture occurs in your drawing, then you will get into a better system of changing the direction of how you're applying the pencil, and also planning ahead a little bit more when you're working. I know I can tend to be quite sporadic with my drawings, but it's because I don't worry too much about changing from one texture to another. If you find that you need to concentrate on one texture at a time, then by all means stick to one section, complete that, and then move on to the next one. But work from the base upwards. So when you're looking through at your reference, look for the base tone. That's the most important thing to lay down first, and then you will find it much easier to build upon to create the texture and the tone that you need. So I'm just filling this in really, really loosely. This bit over here is quite dark. Oh, it's really weird to not actually spend too much time on this. It's speed drawing. Colour pencils don't tend to be very speedy, so this is actually good practice. Trying out something a bit different. Also trying to avoid getting my hand in the way that keeps catching the focus. Hopefully it's not happening too often, and you can see what I'm up to. So the skin of the lemur is it's a bit of a weird texture really, because it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen pig skin, where it's almost a bit flaky, like it's got a bit of a pattern to it, and then the fur is over the top of it, so it's, I don't know, it's a weird one. It's got a bit of a textured pattern underneath and then fur on top. So I would go about that by just filling in so I've got all of the tone down. It's got a bit of a cooler grey as well. Making sure the values are right so that things start to become a bit more 3D as well. Just concentrate on that while you go. I'm going to fill this in with the circular motion so that's all solid. And the eye itself, this bit here actually needs to be a bit darker. So again, when you're drawing something and you find that once you've put in the darker section or a lighter section, once it's been defined and it looks too light, it's quite good to go back in. That's why I do try, if I can, to stay quite light, because then you have the option to make it darker. Whereas if you go the other way round and you go really hard the first time that you're drawing it and then you draw in the rest of it and it's too dark, it's then hard to lighten it up. So I would always advise going lighter first. So I've just put a little layer of a purpley, what's the colour? French grey. It's kind of a purpley grey, and then I'm going to blend it in with what's it called? Buff titanium. So it just has a bit more definition. And you'll see that I've blended over the top of the eyelashes, so I'll pop them back in again. There we go, that's a bit better. So now it's got the darker bit on top. It was looking way too light. But that's a bit better now. Just put in those eyelashes again. It's actually really quite dark along the top there, so I'm going to use black to define that top bit. Oh, I've come in too far. So if anything like this happens, so I've just gone over that top bit with the black, so it's actually changed the shape of his eye. So I'm going to blend over the top with the buff titanium, because this one actually I find will blend quite light over the top. So there we go, let's fix that all right. And now I can just blend in a bit more of a darker tone around that eyelid. I'm going to go in on the eye, the pupil as well, just while I've got it in my hand. So the texture on the skin we can create just by doing a few lines here and there, like you would with a dog nose. Just adding in a little bit of a suggested texture. Doesn't need to be super accurate or anything, just something that suggests there's a bit of texture there. I'm just using a kind of U shape, semicircle kind of shape, just to add in. I'm not being very precise at all, but it just adds a little bit of a pattern to that section there, because there'll be hair over the top of it as well, so just add something. This bit goes quite dark, so I don't need to worry too much about that. Again, swapping out. Once this is another bit that now that the other parts have been filled in, it's starting to look a bit too light still, so just fill that in. And this bit under here needs to be defined, so it's quite shiny on the top there. So this is quite a good change in texture quite abruptly here. So you've got the soft fur on the outside, and then this bit on the inside here is the bottom eyelid, so it's quite shiny, so keep that quite smooth. And then we can use the buff titanium just to highlight that. there's a little inner bit in there as well, so just get to define that. I find it really tricky to talk while I'm doing the precise bits. Also, my hand is completely in the way. Right, just going around the bottom of the eye there. Okay, so when you have a surface like this eyelid here, it's quite easy to just leave it as one blank surface, but it actually still has a little bit of texture to it. So if you apply a little bit of a darker tone just in little bits, like a little blob, I suppose, just back and forth with the pencil, just to add a little bit of texture. I'm going to sharpen this buff titanium so I can get quite a specific line with it. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so I need this line in here. And then the actual eyelid itself comes all the way along here, and we can use the buff titanium just to blend in a little bit more. And then as you go on to the furry bit, you can start adding in the furry texture, so you can do that by drawing in fur individually. Just going to change to a slightly different angle so that hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm doing a bit better, because the camera just keeps on focusing on my hand, which is pretty annoying. So for the furry texture on this section up here, where you need to draw in fur that has a bit of white, has a bit of dark, so you've obviously got the cool tone base already. I might just blend that in a tiny bit more. But what I would do on this is I would draw in the dark fur. So pay attention to the direction of fur. I'm going to draw those all in individually. I've got black here, actually I might just switch over to a dark sepia so it's not quite so harsh. And then I will just pop in the fur in the right direction. It kind of all goes all over the place really. So just a nice loose hand, a medium pressure. Again, don't overthink it too much, because that can be what happens with these sorts of things. Looking at the reference and seeing the fur where it's a mixture of white and dark, it looks a bit daunting, but if you don't overthink it too much, it's quite easy to achieve. So you pop in quite a few hairs, just following the directions, switching it around a little bit so that they're not all going straight like they are. Like some of the hairs have got a slight curve to them, so they do move around a little bit. So just following it as close as you can to the direction on the reference, and then yeah, just being quite sporadic with it. It's quite I say I'm putting this down with a medium pressure, just trying to do it nice and quick. Don't need to spend too much time on that sort of bit because it's only a base really. So when you get to the edge of the white fur, obviously just don't put too many bits in there, but enough just to give it the impression that there is fur against it as well. It's leading from one colour to another, just gives that sort of suggestion. And then when you get round here, you can see the skin as well, so I'm just going to do a very light sort of scribbly layer, and then start to keep the pencil strokes quite short. So it goes into, so this bit here goes into the nose where it is a mixture again. So I'm just going to do short strokes there. So just all it is really is just paying attention to the reference and just keeping an eye on what the direction is with the fur, and if you need to add in any texture or skin pattern or anything like that, and just planning ahead a little bit as you go and adjusting it accordingly. So this bit in the corner here is quite dark, so I'm just going to increase the pressure there, and then to blend it all out, I'm going to add in a bit more of a grey. This is a cool grey again, so it's Cold Grey 5, this one. It's quite dark. I'm going to blend over the top of this. So we've got all of the lines in there, but I'm just going to blend over the top just to bring them all together. And then it helps to add in the lighter bits afterwards. If you have a slice tool, you might find that quite helpful. I'm going to try and do it without the slice tool though, just for those of you who haven't got one. And then I'll come back to that. I'm just going to go down here and fill this in a little bit more fur down here. You'll notice I haven't been sharpening my pencil that much, as when you're in base layers and just adding in the general fur direction, doesn't need to be that sharp, so don't waste your pencils too much on the base layers. So if you're sharpening them lots, then you're going to lose some of your pencil. Here I'm just adjusting the pressure accordingly. If it's slightly darker, I push a bit harder. Constantly using that extended oval kind of shape just to help blend the pencil in. Just going to go gently into the edge here so that as it fades into this type of fur. And then on the nose, it goes to a much shorter. It's almost, I mean, it almost just looks like skin, to be honest, but I think it has got a very short fur on it. I'm going to draw this in, and then once I've filled in the base of the nose area, I will then go back up to sort this out, because I need a bit more of the ear really. I'm just going to move it down here so that you can see the nose. So the actual nose area itself is very dark, so you can't really see much of the nose definition. You just see a little hint of the highlights. So I'm going to roughly work that out with the base here. Oh, can't see. Move my thumb round. So the nose itself is quite a cool grey, or a cool tone. So I'm going to put that in with the Cold Grey 2. Let's do a light layer across the top here. It's dark. This dark section here I'm going to do a bit heavier so it's a bit more obvious changes. And then on the actual nose itself up here, it's quite cool. So I don't know if you can see what I've done there, where I've sort of fanned around, started off pointing over this way, and then as it comes around the nose, you just change very gradually so that it's then pointing in the right direction on the other side of the nose. This bit is all quite fuzzy, so it doesn't need to have too much of a direction as such. Just going to get all that dark section in for the nose there. And then this bit up here, there's just a tiny slither of white fur, but then it does go into the black nose. So I'm just going to fill all of that in. This section down here is a lot warmer, so I'm going to switch to a warm grey for that bit. That's the bottom of the nose there, and the little lip, and then this side as well. So it's quite dark in this little bit over here. I'm going to add in the warm base tone first. I think this bit, this is kind of an in-between, this bottom part of the nose. I'm going to go for a warm grey though, because then we can blend it into the lip underneath. Just going over the edge of the nose there with quite a sharp pencil, just to follow the edges as much as you can. I mean, this one's actually quite tricky to follow because it's so dark, can't see where the definition is. I'm going to fill this bit here in, and then using the circular scribble-like motion again just to blend it in. On the nose it has got a pattern. This is like a little bit like a dog nose if you've done one of them. Got the tutorial for a dog nose if you want to try that out as well. You can just add in a tiniest little bit of a hint of the pattern. It just gives it a little bit more of a texture, but you don't need to go crazy and draw in every single little bump and circle. Just a little hint of it will just give it enough to suggest that it is a nose. So this bit over here is back to fur again, so concentrating on the direction of the fur, just in little, I'm not doing individual bits of fur here because it's still on the second layer, just suggesting which way it needs to go. Defining the edges. And then I will add in the outer bit there. It's probably, oh, I don't know, light to medium pressure here. Just trying to stay within the lines there really, because it goes into a white fur background. You want to keep that edge quite crisp. I'm going to block in this bottom bit here. Anything that's in complete shadow, you don't need to worry too much about direction of fur, but I will still follow it round just out of habit. I mean, you wouldn't want to be going that way, so it's, as long as it's a nice even layer of colour, that's the main thing. Okay, so now I've blocked out where the lighter bits go. I can then go over with a slightly darker colour, because obviously not just white. So I'm going to go in with the cooler grey again, just fill in those highlights. And then on this section it's sort of an in-between. I'm going to swap back to the warmer tone, fill that in and on here as well. It's quite a firm pressure applying now that I know where the highlights and lowlights are. Okay, I'm going to go in with a black now just to really define the darkest areas. Yeah, with the black I'm using quite a firm pressure. There's not really much point being light with a black because you may as well just use a grey. So if you're using black to really define something, you may as well use a firmer pressure just to make sure you get the contrast. Trying to follow the shapes of the highlight and that nose. It kind of creates a bit of a weird bobbly pattern. There we go. Right, now this bit down here is a lot darker, so I'm just going to get my dark sepia again, just fill that in. So on the darkest sections, like I was just saying about using black and that, if it is dark, don't be afraid to fill it in dark. Like, don't be afraid of black. If it needs to be dark, then go for it. It can be quite easy to lighten things up. I know I do it sometimes on black fur. I'll lighten things up without realising, but they are all still quite, in the darkest shadows it's pretty dark, so go for it where it needs it. I'm going to add in a little bit more to this one because now I've filled it in a bit more. This is way too light. And then I can do the same on the top of the nose. So now that it's all dark, I can add in the base on the top of the nose a bit harder, so we can distinguish the different areas. So I'm going to do that with a cold grey again. I'm just going to add in a little bit more of the definition on the snout bit here. The harder I press, obviously the darker the area, and it just helps to define the shape. So this bit round here with the snout has got almost like two sections. So obviously the bit further round is a bit wider, but then the light catches the midsection here, so it divides it up. So rather than it being all one solid mass of dark grey, there is a slight bit of a highlight up the middle there. So any tiny little changes in the value, make sure you pay attention to those and then alter the pressure that you're using as you put the pencil down, because then that will just help to create the lighter and darker areas and give you the shape. So I'm going to work my way around his little snout now. As I said before, the nose itself is quite dark, so there's not a huge amount of definition, but if I look really closely I can see that the middle of his nose is just visible, so I'm going to put that in with a black just to give the nose itself a little bit of shape. I can see from this side that the nostril shape goes like that, so I'm going to mimic that over this side and then just make this under here a little bit darker, as that would be where the nose goes in to the nostril, so it'd be a bit deeper, so therefore a bit darker. The nose curves around here, so there's a bit of a funny line up The nose kind of tails off over this side, so I'm gonna just put in these darker sections under here that give this side of his snout and the lips a bit of shape. So again, darker area, firmer pressure. I'm going to give the shape to all of this bit here. So there's a little bit of definition just along the bottom of the nose here where it just catches the light. So I'm going to put that in with a nice creamy luminance because they tend to blend quite nicely over the top of any darker layers. I'm going to add that in just to give a little hint of a highlight. Obviously it is a highlight, but it's not actually that bright, so don't go too heavy on that. I'm going to put the little highlights around the nostril. Again, these are highlights, but they're actually quite a grey blue kind of colour, so if you get a cool grey, you can go over the top of those. Again, if you find it helpful to just do a colour picker exercise and pick out the actual shade of the highlight. You'd be surprised how grey it is. Our eyes tell us that it looks light and bright, so we think, oh, it must be like close to white, but it actually is, so it's really dark, it's really far off from white. It's the same with white fur though, really. It does exactly the same thing, tricks our eyes into thinking that it's white when really it's just full of loads of different colours, and it's often darker than we think. So I'm going to just start building up the colour on the snout, I guess, the bridge of the nose. Again, looking at the reference as I go, pressing a bit harder on the bits that I know are going to be darker. So I'm just constantly adjusting the pressure that I'm using as I apply the pencil, and I'm just altering the direction slightly as well. So depending on which way the fur is going, I'm changing up the direction that I'm putting the pencil down. So it's just a case of looking back at your reference really regularly, just to follow those and make sure it's all as accurate as it can be. As I said before, I'm not going too accurate on this one because I'm trying to go quite quick so that you can see the process rather than all of the intricate details. If you have any questions along the way on this tutorial, just get in touch with me and I can guide you through or talk you through any of the areas. And if you have any other requests for tutorials, then let me know as well, because it's always handy to put together stuff that you're actually in need of. So adding another layer to this nose, again just adjusting the pressure and the direction of the pencil just to build up the fur. On the nose now, we're just going to add in the tiny little hints of detail. So I've got a sharp black pencil and I'm just going to add in some of the little lumps and bumps like we would see on a dog's nose if you're familiar with drawing them. It's not too different. It just has a little fold in the middle here, and then around the edge it's got the definition of the little well, what are they on a nose? It's like not paws, are they? I don't know what they are. Little sections of the nose anyway. Makes up the pattern. So just really loosely add in that suggested texture there. I sometimes use just a swirly motion with my pencil to add in some of that definition as well. If you need the detailed guide of drawing a nose or the fur, I have that in the previous tutorials that I've put together. There's the dog nose, there's also a dog eye which has fur tutorial as part of it as well. So if you need to refer back to those are a little bit more thorough with the process and the layering and everything. Right, so as you can see it's quite dark, but we have the bulk of the pencil down, and the light and the shade, and a little bit of the definition. So I think we can leave that there. So for the white fur I'm going to use cold grey 1 just to add in base layer. On the left hand side it's slightly darker, and then I'm just going to follow the direction of the fur over here as well, using quite a light pressure, to be honest. It's not too heavy, but I'm just going to add in the suggested fur without putting too much detail in. You can suggest it quite easily. So the few little lines. I'll then go in with the darker one, so cold grey 2. Just build up a tiny bit more there as well. And then there's the crossover between the light and the dark fur, so I'm going to get black, I think, because we've done the base layer on this grey section. So I'm now going to get the black to go over the top, so you can use quite hard lines now. The black fur on top here just changes all over the place, so don't be too uniform with your lines. Make sure you're changing it so it kind of all crosses over each other. I'm drawing from the base up, because I find that usually makes for a more realistic hairline, because you tend to press a bit harder as you press down and then you ease it up as you come off. So I usually start at the base, but then when you come to an area like this, so you've got the top of the white fur, I will then actually go the other way round to give the impression of the white fur overlapping slightly, so you kind of see the fur going down into the white fur. We can lay a little bit of white over the top, and you can use the slice tool, but the layers that we've added onto the fur here haven't actually got enough, like the way that we've done it, it won't really work that well with the slice tool. You have to lay quite a few really good base layers down. We'll be able to see a little bit, but I think if you were going to be using a slice tool, you'd need to layer it up very slightly differently. You'd need a few extra solid layers just to be able to lift off the pencil and have the lighter underneath. I can do a little tutorial of the best ways to use a slice tool if that is helpful to anybody. Just let me know in the comments on this video and I'll pop one together. It needs to get quite heavy around here. I'm trying to keep my hand out the way so it doesn't unfocus, but it's proving a bit difficult. So I'm just adding a little bit of shading around the top of this eyelid here. I need to put a bit more on the inside of the eyelid as well, just to give it the shape. Add in the hairs on that too. I haven't gone back in with the eyelashes actually, so I'm going to put those in. Try and do it so you can see it. Again, these are kind of all over the place, they do move around, so don't be tempted to do just straight lines. Move them around a little bit. And when I get to this bit here, I'm going to define that corner. I'm going to go in with the black, make sure everything has been defined. So we've got the edges of the white fur here. Just going to define that with some small hairs going into the white area. And this bit here is a mixture of white and dark fur, so I'm going to leave the lines quite spread out. Just make sure you sharpen your pencil again if you need to. And then I'm going to just add in a few little hairs in the white as it crosses over from light to dark. So there's not loads, but just enough that it you can see the transition. There's a few up here as well, but not lots. So I'm just going to add in a little bit more to the top here, and then I'm going to put the white or the grey in for the ear so that we can just overlap that. So this ear, obviously it looks a little bit daunting when you look at the reference. You think there's a lot of white fur there, but you've got to do dark underneath. So I'm going to look for the darkest area first, which is the ear, the edge of the ear itself, where the line is just here. So there are white lines over the top, white hairs over the top there, but what I'm going to do is just do a nice base layer of the cool grey. Just blend that in quite heavily. Because it's a light area, there's not going to be lots of layers, so we don't need to worry too much about running out of tooth. I'm not pressing really hard, but it is a firm layer. I'm just going to go over it a couple of times so that it's nice and blended in. And then I'm going to ease it up as we come up to the top here. So as I move away from this dark edge, I'm going to just decrease the pressure as I move up the ear. So you can see that it sort of has a bit of a gradient, starting dark and fading to a lighter bit at the top. Go over again, just blending, make sure it's all blended into the paper. So I'm going to go for warm grey 5 on this one because it is quite warm. I've used a cool grey on the base, but that doesn't matter too much. I think actually the cooler grey does help on this because it's got the white on top. So if I'd have gone for a warm grey base, then the lighter fur would have then become a bit pink. So that's another, like an exception to the rule, that if you've got a darker underneath, but you have a cool, a warm underneath that is a bit darker, but then a cool top layer, it's best to go for the cooler layer, because if you need to take any off with a slice tool or work over the top, then the cooler layer will show through. So it's a bit of a mix, this one. Kind of works a bit back to front. So I'm going to add in some of the detail and the depth on this bit of the ear. Again, reducing the pressure as I move away from that edge, because this bit in here is quite dark. I'm going to go quite heavy on that bit, and then a lot lighter over here, and just kind of hint in little bits of fur. It looks a bit messy at this stage, but it will come together once it's had a little bit of white put in. So the bit underneath here, there's fur on the other side of this dark section, is white, but again we'll do the same as we did here. So a cool grey, and just suggest the white fur. I'm going to just take off my outline there, use a putty rubber because it helps just pick it off, you don't have to get any mess. So I'm just going to add in a little bit of a suggestion of the white fur there, not go too crazy. And just work with the direction of the fur. This is actually kind of out of focus as well, so don't feel like you need to spend much time on that. Just blend this edge here. I've actually left my pencil in the way, so what I'm going to do is just get the electric eraser. So I left my pencil outline in the way there, so you can see the edge, and we don't want that because it needs to blend. So I've just removed that with the electric eraser. I'm going to blend over it a little bit, and then I'm going to get the buff titanium to define the edge. Oh, snapped my point. Okay, right, so that's kind of blended in, so it looks like it's out of focus. I'm going to work my way along this side of the fur as well. Just going to take the outlines away. And we don't need to worry too much about the whiskers. Start taking the lines away from the whiskers because this lemur's got black whiskers, which is handy. Not like white ones where you have to remove it and emboss it and all the different techniques. I'm just going to add in just again a little bit of a suggestion of the fur. You can, if you want to, if you don't want to lose your lines on the whiskers, you could put them in, but I'm going to just leave them for now. I'm going to blot the outline so it's much fainter, so I can still see them for when I put the whiskers in, but it's not getting in the way of the grey or the white fur. So I'm just going to pop all that in, following the direction of the fur again. You can see here that I've actually left a little bit of the nose undone, so I'm going to blend that in. That will be a bit darker once we finish this area off here. So just add a bit more along the edge here. If you sweep out on the last little bit of your pencil mark, it will just give the fur a little bit of shape. I think I might have done some of them a bit swoopy there, but they do move around on the edges. You can just see some of the longer hairs poking out. And then on the reference, the hairs do show up a lot better, obviously, because it's got a slightly green, well, it has a green background, so you can see it against the background. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to leave it white on the back. It will suggest what we can with the cold grey. So I'm going to go around here. Just adjusted it slightly so you can see this bottom bit, but it's a very similar process. Under here, the white fur is actually really dark grey, so I'm going to use a heavier pressure for that bit. Again, following the direction of the fur. And then just a little suggestion of the other fur around the nose there. So this bit here I've gone a bit heavy, so I'm going to use the electric eraser as I've got it here, but I'm actually not going to press it. Just take away a little bit of the heaviness of that bit there. Right, so that's all of the white fur on that bit. So I'm just going to finish off the top of the ear. So I have marks here in the outline, so I'm going to rub those out. I can still roughly see where they need to go. It is a lot lighter, so I'm going to use just a very, very light pressure to add in a tiny bit of definition with a cold grey. But this is quite white up here, so it would be defined better if we had a background to put it against, but I'm going to leave it because quite often we don't work with backgrounds in colour pencil, so it's good to find a way of getting around that problem. So I'm going to just blend in a little bit more. I have a tiny bit here which is a bit heavy, so again I'm going to use the electrical razor, but I'm not going to press it to turn it on because that just takes up way too much. I can use it without, just to take a little bit out. And a tiny bit more, so it's got a blob at the top there. There we go. Then I'll just blend it over a bit better. I find with white fur, especially when it is in this sort of setup where you've got the dark fur underneath, I find it throws me every single time, and I think, oh no, I don't know how to do this. But I find it's easy just to break it down into little sections rather than trying to tackle it in one go and get the exact finish straight away, because it does take time building up the layers. So just be patient with it, and like I've said before, don't overthink it, because that can sometimes be what holds you back or makes it go wrong sometimes, is overthinking it, making it too uniform or making it too dark or leaving it too light. So try and take what you think you need to do out of your head and just follow the reference. Sometimes people find turning the artwork upside down helps for that sort of thing, because then you're tricking your brain into not doing what you think you can see and drawing what you actually see. I'm just going to get a white now and blend in this fur up here. You can use quite a firm pressure to get some of that fur detail in. I would normally have a bit of a sharper point, but I don't have the right sharpener up here in the studio at the moment, and I need to try and work with what I've got. So it is good sometimes to get yourself in those positions, because it makes you work around a problem in a different way. So I'm just working with a point that is, it's okay, but it's not super sharp, but I am still able to make quite a sharp line by adding a little bit more pressure. So where we have the nice base underneath, it makes the line flow really nicely, and you can just see, not that you can see with my thumb in the way, you can see the line is nice and crisp, and it is a smooth line rather than it being all bumpy and seeing any of the grain of the paper. I do need to sharpen it a bit more, so I'm going to grab a knife. I think I'm just going to show you what I'm doing as well, just in case you ever get to the point where you can't fit your pencil into your sharpener, which is what I've got up here. I do have a manual one downstairs, but because my pencil's got quite short, I'm now struggling to get it into the sharpener, or getting it back out again, should I say. So I'm just going to use the knife to sharpen this into a nice point. Obviously just be very gentle, you don't want to take lots off at a time, and be careful of your fingers. This is just a Stanley blade I've got here, nothing fancy. Okay, that's pretty sharp now. And you can see, if you have pencil extenders, it is possible to make a pencil last a really long time. So that's one I've used for quite a while. I'm just going to grab a pencil extender actually. So I have these, which are just little wooden ones. I think I got them on Amazon. And then you press at the top there, and then obviously it's a lot easier to hold. So getting back to the white fur, now that I've got a sharp pencil, I'm going to add in lots of these lines for the fur that overlaps this edge of the ear here. Now I think I've done it a little bit too light actually, so now that I have the white fur over the top, I can see that it actually needs to be quite a lot darker. So before I finish that, I'm going to just put in some more, I'm going to put black in just to darken the edge of the ear here. because it can be really, it can fool you into thinking it's lighter because it has the white fur over the top. It can fool you into thinking it's a lot lighter than it is, but it's actually quite dark. So I'm going to put in some black. Again, if you use the colour picker, then you can pick out the colour and it will make it a lot easier to see that straight away. I like to try and do it by eye because I find it just helps me to develop that skill to notice it myself. But I mean, sometimes, like I've just done here, it does take a bit of trial and error. Right, that should be dark enough now. Okay, so I'm going to go back over with the white. So this is a polychromos white. So the white fur does start to build up quite a lot on this top side up here. And I'm going to put in lots of that over the top. And add a little bit of white over here just to blend in with the grey that we've already put down. But now that the white's over the top of here, I can see that this actually could do with being a little bit darker. And I'm going to grab a warm grey actually this time, so it gets a little bit warmer this side. And then we'll need to do the same with the black over the top of the light on this side. So a nice sharp pencil, and then get those hairs in individually. Follow the reference as close as you can to see where they need to come from, just because that helps to give the right shape of the face and things. If it's coming from a weird angle, it makes it look like it's coming out of a different shape. I'm going to blend this bit here. Add in a little bit more definition between the hairs and do a little bit more of that up here as well actually. I can just see a little bit shining through. Well, it's not really shining, is it? It's the opposite of shining. Showing through, I should say. And I'm going to switch to a grey as well, just so that we have a few different tones in this bit here where the darker does show through. And then I'll go back over the top with the white just to finish it off. So blend that in over the top, especially these bits here because I've ended up with some quite blocky ends to the pencil marks there. So I'll blend those away, blend over the top, and then up towards this top edge where the white fur comes around the edge of the ear. And there are white hairs that poke out around the top of this bit of fur here too. So I'm going to put those in and add some over this darker section here. So only a few, don't want loads, because we can see some of the white through. So I'm just going to add in some white hairs that are coming off of this white section here, trying to put them in as firmly as possible. It needs quite a sharp pencil, so I'm just going to quickly sharpen that. And there we go. So sharp as possible over the top there. And then I'm just going to fill in this so it's got a nice bright white finish for the white hair there. Then for the white hairs that go over here, just make sure you've done all of them. I'm just going to add in a few more and then pop some of the more solid white lines on this fur that comes off around the cheek. Again, you don't need very many, but just a few just to give it that little suggestion. I'm going to add some in over here as well, this little bit of the face, and on this bit where it goes into white fur as well. So just pop them over the top. I'm going to go back to the black because I was doing that, I think, on these here and got distracted. So I'm going to finish off the black because now we've got all of the white ones on this part of the ear. We can then go over with the black ones that are longer and overlap this ear fur. So nice strong lines, again working from the base and moving up. Try to follow the reference as close as possible because you don't want to be putting these lines in and then looking back at the reference, finding you've done them all in the wrong place because they're not going to be easy to take off. So pop as many of those in as you can. I'm going to add a little bit of definition to this grey or white fur here, just so that it looks like it follows along to the head, because otherwise it looks like there's a bit of a gap there. And then I'll keep the darker fur down where it needs to be, so that it gives a bit of a hint that the ear fur kind of comes around here, because obviously we haven't got the background to show exactly where it is. I'm going to pop a bit more of the darker fur in over the top of here, not too much. If you find you need to define any of these white hairs that we've put over the top, then you can do, but just be quite loose about it. Don't follow them super close with a heavy line, because then it will just look really false. They won't look like real hairs. Just add in a few extra little ones across here. So this bit down here by the eye is actually a bit darker, so I've started darkening it and then got distracted to do other areas. So I'm going to just make that a little bit darker. Again, just using the circular scribble-like motion. I can see, looking at the eye as I've come round, it's actually not as strong as the colour on the eye on the reference. So while I'm here, I'm going to just add in a bit more. Just trying to find a colour that works well. I think I might use for some burnt sienna, just to pop in a bit more of a stronger colour. Doesn't need to be loads, but just noticed a bit. It's a little bit pale, so I'm going to add some of that, and then I'm going to get an orange, like an actual bright orange. This one is terracotta, so I'm going to pop a bit of the terracotta on over the top of it as well, that I can just do a nice blending layer with that. And the tooth on the eyeball has not got a huge amount of tooth left on it now. I'm just going to blend in as much as I can around here. I mean, there's a lot more detail I could put in the eye, so I'm trying to just leave it at a basic level for this tutorial, but it's really hard to not fill it in. Okay, I can see on here that I've done this bit up here a little bit dark, so just while I'm looking back at the reference and comparing it to my drawing, I'm just going to remove a bit of that. So that give and take, just constantly refining what you're doing. Blend that in a bit as well, so that kind of blends a bit better. This bit here is a bit heavy as well, so I'm just going to go over that and just blend that in as well. That makes it a bit more It flows a little bit better then. Okay, so it's just the bridge of the nose and then all of the dark hairs around this bit here. So the bridge of the nose is that short fur I was talking about earlier. It's really, really fine. It needs quite a solid base, but it does change tone quite a lot. So I'm going to get just a cold grey to do another layer over this one, just to make it quite a smooth surface. And then I can get the darker colours. I think I'll go for the warm grey 5. I'm going to put the hairs that go into the white, just define those, and the edge of this dark fur here. Define that with some really short, sharp moves, and follow the direction of the fur. All of the fur around the nose is really short, so it's much different than the texture we have up here. So it's just a case of using really tiny marks. You can hear the tap tap. It's just little tiny little marks following the direction of the fur. So we have the nose, the dark bit of the nose there. There's a highlight bit on the nose, just a slightly lighter section, and then it goes into the short fur. So I'm going to use the tiny marks just to fill in the darker areas, but just give the slight definition of a bit of detail, but nothing too mad. Don't need to do every single tiny little hair, just a few here and there, just to hint at some detail. You can also use the scribble-like motion just to fill in some of the darker areas as well, and then just pop a bit of the hair over the top. So I'm going to do that for this up here because it's a bit further away, it's not quite in focus, the same as the bit around the nose. But changing the pressure to make the darker areas a bit more solid really helps on this as well, because it just gives it a bit of shape. So this along here needs to be a bit darker, so I'm just going to grab my black out again just to define that edge of the nose. And then I need to just make this here a little bit. I need to come around a bit so that the nose joins up to the edge there. And then over the top there are a few longer hairs. So this is like really short fuzzy hair on the main part of the bridge of the nose, and then there are a few longer ones. So I'm just going to add a tiny bit more on here just to deepen the colour on this. Again, if you go too heavy on a certain area, you can use the rubber as I showed earlier, or you can use a putty rubber, or you can go over with a lighter colour, like the buff titanium for example. We could use that to just go over the top and add a bit of a highlight. You see it just changes the tone of it, brightens it up. So there we go, and then I'm just going to add in the dark hairs now. So this part under the eye we haven't quite finished, so I'm going to add in the longer hairs that overlap, so work my way around with those, and then I can do the ones under the eye. So they all go off in different directions, all over the place. A nice sharp pencil, but I'm not pressing too hard, to be honest. It doesn't need to be really firm pressure. You can just suggest it, and then add in the hair on this part of the eye as well. And then the little bits of hair that overlap. A little bit of hair in here, a teeny bit in this bit because it goes to a white and dark bit of fur. So on the bridge of the nose there are just a few hairs, so just pop in a few, follow the direction really closely on this because there's only a few hints. And then I'm just going to put in the whiskers, so let me just finish this bit off first because obviously we don't want to go over and do things underneath as much as possible. And avoid that. So this bit here I feel like I've done a bit too much. I'm gonna take the electric eraser and just, without pressing it again, I'm gonna just rub slightly just to take some of that away. I will then need to go back in with the cold grey just to give that base layer another little layer, just make sure that's all there. Then I can go back to the black and I'll just be a bit more sparing. I think I just went a bit overboard. There we go, that's a bit better. So I'm going to define the edge of this the little snout, and then do some whiskers. So quite a sharp pencil. Should be able to follow your lines still if you have them drawn from your outline. Just going to follow those. It's hard to concentrate doing whiskers and talk at the same time. The ones at the bottom here as well. Try to be as strong as you can with the lines on whiskers. Like, you don't want them, like I've done a few here that are a bit wobbly and they don't look quite as effective, so you want a nice strong smooth line. I'm going to actually take these two out because I think they just look a bit weak, and try those again. Just need to put the base in again, so we've got a gap. So it's good not to go too hard with whiskers if you do get them wrong. Sometimes it's down to the angle of them as well. It's just really tricky to draw at that angle. Right, got a few more dark hairs going over here. And really define that, the fur underneath the eye, because it goes quite dark there. I'm just going to apply quite a hard, firm pressure under that, just to get that really dark colour, and then again in the corner of the eye and on the eyelid. So I can see this bit here is not quite dark enough. It's looking a bit weird, so I'm going to just pop a bit more pencil on that, just define that a little bit more. There's a little bit of the texture on that bit I'm missing as well, and I think I'm going to go in on the nose with a bit more detail, a tiny bit more, just to give it a bit more shape. And just a smidge more on here, I think, just to bring that nose down a bit. because otherwise it all sort of blends into one. You can add in the bluey tones because this fur on top here does have a bit of a blue sort of mixture of tones really. The short highlighted bits are quite blue and then the shadowy areas have got quite a warm tone to them. I'm just going to go over the top of the nose as well because it's quite cool, and then define these highlights under here with this as well. So I always find the luminants are pretty good at going over the top of the dark bits. I'm going to pop a little bit more in this eyelid here and then just define underneath so they've got that nice shape. Yeah. So I'd say it's pretty much finished. I mean, it's a bit different to the reference obviously because we haven't got the background. Might just add a little bit more in to define these shapes around the nose. There's actually a little bit of white fur on here, so we can use this, the buff titanium, to add them in. And go back in for all the little details. Surprising how many there are when you really look closely. Doing it in a rush doesn't really allow you the time to concentrate on those. Oh, I need a warm grey. There you go. Ooh. Just pop a little bit more definition under here. And a few more tiny hairs. As you've got the long whiskers, but there's also little teeny tiny ones you can just add in as well. There, he's looking pretty close. So the only other thing I can suggest with this would be for the eye, if there is a slight bit of a highlight that you'd like to add in. I'm just going to sharpen up my white pencil again, so I'm going to add in that highlight. It helps just to bring it in and make it look even more realistic. So this section here is just a tiny bit lighter. There we go, that just makes it pop a bit more. There's a few little bits around the bottom of the eye which I picked up as well, so I'm going to put those in. And then I'm just going to add in a little bit more of this orange colour. So there we go, he's all finished. So you can see I've got the different textures on the nose, the bridge of the nose, the soft fur, the glassy eye, the texture around the eyelid, and the fur with light and dark fur all in one. So there's quite a selection of different textures there, and I hope this has helped you to think about how to go about some of those when it changes from one to another in one drawing. You can apply all of these techniques to various different pictures. It doesn't just have to be this one. And if you have any questions, just get in touch and I'll be happy to help.